Let's begin. Good day, everyone. I'm Richard Ponzio from the Stimson Center, and on behalf of our event partners too, the Alliance for Multilateralism, UN 2020, Together First, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung New York office, and the Baha'i International Community, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's global virtual conversation on the eve of UN Day during this 75th anniversary commemoration year of the United Nations. And like myself, I hope many of you are also wearing your UN blue tie for UN Day tomorrow, or your UN blue scarf. And no doubt, many of you are aware that last month's world leaders, they endorsed in New York the UN 75 Declaration, which details 12 commitments for strengthening global governance to better address global threats, challenges, and opportunities. It further requests the Secretary General to report back before the end of the 75th UN General Assembly with specific recommendations to advance this common global agenda. Since its launch at the start of the 74th UN General Assembly, the Alliance for Multilateralism has worked to advance reforms without compromising on key principles and values in order to make multilateral institutions and the global political and economic order more inclusive and effective in delivering tangible results to citizens around the world. Similarly, the networks within global society, such as UN 2020 and Together First, have worked to leverage UN 75 to upgrade the world body and other global institutions to increase their inclusivity and effectiveness. In this spirit, and in the celebration of United Nations Day tomorrow, today's program will explore, initially through 2 rounds of questions and discussion, first, concrete ways to build on momentum from UN 75 to work towards more ambitious global governance strengthening and renewal goals. And second, generating ideas on deepening cooperation over the coming 2 to 3 years between global civil society and the Alliance for Multilateralism to further global governance innovation. Now, before I introduce our esteemed panelists, let me briefly note that we're pleased to announce that over 600 of you have signed up for today's program, and we've designed this session to be as interactive as possible, especially during the second half of our program. So using Zoom's Q&A function, we encourage you to share your succinct questions with your name and where you're coming from. And then my colleagues and I will do our best to call you onto the screen to briefly share your question with everyone. At the same time, we also welcome your participation via the chat function, but for questions, please use the Zoom Q&A function. Now, turning to our panel, we're very fortunate to have from the Alliance for Multilateralism, Ambassador Christoph Heusgen, permanent representative of Germany to the United Nations, and his colleague Gervan Labras, the Deputy Director of the Center for Analysis, Planning and Strategy in the French Foreign Ministry. From the United Nations Secretariat, their 75th anniversary office, I'm delighted to include Natalie Samarasinha, who serves as Chief of Strategy. And from global civil society, I have the pleasure to welcome to this virtual conversation Giovanna Kuhl from the Together First campaign and the Igarape Institute in Brazil, where she serves as a non-resident researcher while completing her doctoral studies. We'll also hear from Dr. Volker Lehmann from the UN 2020 Initiative and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung New York office, where he serves as a senior policy analyst. And finally, at the end of our program today, we're fortunate to have the international coordinator for the UN 2020 Initiative, Fergus Watt, with us both to summarize some of today's chief recommendations, as well as to offer his own thoughts and reflections on how civil society can best work with governments post-UN 75. So let's kick things off, turning first to Ambassador Heusgen. In connection with the UN 75 anniversary and the start of the new General Assembly session last month, the Alliance for Multilateralism convened again on the 25th of September, and its members recommitted themselves to 3 streams of action in support of, quote, strong and effective multilateral cooperation based on the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, international law and justice, end quote. So with this backdrop, how does the Alliance view UN 75, its declaration, and more central to today's discussion, what are some practical ways that you see the Alliance working to support the declaration's 12 distinct commitments and the mandated follow-through report of the Secretary General, which we expect sometime next year? Ambassador Heusgen.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thanks for convening us here this morning. I forgot my UN tie this morning, was too early, but I put the UN flag in the backdrop, so I hope that is a good excuse. No, but thanks for holding this. As you said, we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, and we have to be honest. We have seen during this last years a number of concrete events, but also strategies of national governments that undercut the UN and that undercut the international rules-based order. And this is actually this trend that led France and Germany to launch the Alliance for Multilateralism. And it was launched actually last year. And when Yves Le Drian and Heiko Maas on fairly short notice, convened a meeting at the General Assembly last year when we still met in person. On very short notice, we had, Gervin, I think more than 50 foreign ministers from all around the world joining the event. And that was a very clear message that countries around the globe in all continents, they believe in multilateralism, they believe in an international rules-based order, and since then this alliance has been active, let's say, in two directions. One is the general direction of holding up the belief in multilateralism. So it's an idea, it's a strategy, and it's a general way forward. And the other one is very concrete, that this multilateralism is this strategy is translated into concrete action. And you just mentioned the meeting that took place on the margins of this year's General Assembly, and we had over 70 foreign ministers and vice foreign ministers, again from all regions. And I believe that this is really a very strong signal that there is an alternative to succumbing to antagonistic geopolitical dynamics. And instead of lamenting a more fractured world, we, the members of the alliance, wanted to give political backing to the idea of a multilateral cooperation and defending the rules-based international order. So, as I said earlier, the Alliance for Multilateralism underpins its signals of support for cooperative multilateral solutions with concrete initiatives in the Alliance's actions areas, which are international law, accountability, you mentioned that at the beginning, human rights, disarmament and arms control, climate, cyberspace, and global public goods. Now, you asked specifically how the Alliance supports the UN 75th Declaration's commitments. Let me first say in general that our Alliance is actually there to support the UN Charter. So everything that the Alliance does is in support of the United Nations and the rules-based international order, and the UN 75 Declaration is a reconfirmation of the Charter and the objectives that are in the Charter. But when turning to very concrete points, one of the 12 UN 75 Declaration commitments says that we will place women and girls at the center. And one of the first initiatives launched in the framework of the Alliance for Multilateralism was the Gender at the Center initiative, and it now also promotes the Generation Equality Forum. Or the second goal is, second commitment of the declaration is, and I quote, "We will improve digital cooperation." And related issues that are being tackled in the Alliance are improving trust and security in cyberspace through, for instance, the Paris call for trust and security in cyberspace, but also initiatives aimed at closing the digital divide, such as the one recently launched by Estonia and Singapore. Also, with regard to climate, the Alliance for Multilateralism has adopted a declaration on climate and security and supports the International Solar Alliance. These are just three of the commitments of the UN 75 declaration that are supported by concrete initiatives of the Alliance of Multilateralism. I could go on, but we are limited time. So again, thank you very much. I must say it's a good example again of German-French cooperation and our common stand for the international rules-based order. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Husgen, for your opening remarks, and great to see the progress. I remember when you launched the initiative a year ago at the UN General Assembly, 55 foreign ministers signed on to your initial declaration of principles. Now we have 70 participating in last month's event, also during UNGA Week. Turning to our colleague from the UN Secretariat, Natalie, last month, the Secretary General's UN 75 report was presented to world leaders on UN 75 Day, the 21st of September, the kickoff of the week. And this, of course, is a major accomplishment of your office and the global conversation that the Secretary General sponsored over the last year. How do the priorities coming out of this conversation mesh or maybe even diverge from the commitments in the intergovernmental UN 75 declaration? How can the spirit and substance, though, of both of these important documents be realized in the coming weeks and months?
Thanks so much, Richard, and it's a pleasure to join this panel. I apologize for not wearing my UN 75 tie today, but I'm glad that you're flying the tie and the flag is being flown by the ambassador. So thank you so much. I thought maybe just a very quick recap of what we actually did with the UN 75 conversation this year. In essence, it was our most ambitious attempt to crowdsource priorities for the future and solutions to the challenges we face. We've heard now from over 1.2 million people in all UN member and observer states. We've had more than 1,000 dialogues in 80 countries. And I think crucially, before people accuse us of only preaching to the converted, we commissioned a scientifically sampled study of 50,000 people in 50 diverse countries who sort of acted as a reality check. So when I talk about findings, this is not the UN fan club speaking, this is a representative sample of the global population. And what we found, I think I'll mention, just three things. In light of COVID-19, people want access to basic services. I mean, that was a very clear call. Health, education, sanitation, technology. And they want action to tackle inequality. So they're looking beyond the immediate impacts, a little bit to the long-standing issues that are getting worse as a result of COVID. And I think that maps really well, firstly, onto the 2030 agenda. We can't forget this was supposed to be the decade of action as well. And, we need to really be looking at how we can reinvigorate that going forward. And it also maps very well to the declaration that was adopted by member states. The paragraphs on leave no one behind, place women and girls at the center, build trust, improve digital cooperation, and be prepared. I think looking to the future, the overwhelming concerns were the climate crisis and destruction of the natural environment. And I think it's remarkable that this really remained the top priority across all communities, even as the pandemic really took hold and we saw it move around the world. And I think if there's one area of divergence from the consultation and the declaration, I think it's in the relative emphasis and priority given to this. So you have a good paragraph on protect our planet, but the level of ambition that came out of our consultation seemed much higher than the language here, which talks basically about the existing state commitments on the Paris and in line with the SDGs. The other priorities are also over-affected, preventing conflict, human rights, tackling corruption. We were very pleased, that came out strongly through our consultation, even though we didn't ask a question about that. And it is mentioned under building trust in the declaration. And then there was this sort of resounding call, 87% of respondents really felt that global cooperation was not just something for good times, not just the nice to have, something important, but essential for solving the challenges we face. But it wasn't uncritical of support. They wanted more effective multilateralism and a UN that's more open, inclusive, accountable, and more innovative, which matches, I think, very well the paragraphs on upgrading the UN, boosting partnerships, financing, and youth. We saw a lot of specific proposals, especially on greater civil society and youth engagement, better partnerships with cities and regional organizations. But so, what I'm trying to say, I think, is, we have very big ideas coming out of this consultation, and the declaration has big themes, but we don't have the action bit. We don't know what what that's going to translate to yet. Rethinking the global economy, a new social contract, banning fossil fuel subsidies, universal basic income. These are the sorts of things that are emerging from our consultation. And now we've raised all these expectations, and I think it's incumbent on us to deliver, despite the crisis. And I think because of the crisis. So what we didn't get is a sort of, oh, we just want life to get back to normal. We got a lot of emphasis on the fact that the normal wasn't working for actually a lot of people in the world. But of course, it's not, our office that takes it forward. That'll be the follow-up process by the Secretary General. And of course, it is member states ultimately who need to hopefully live up to their commitment in the declaration to respond to what's come out of our consultation.
Thank you, Natalie. No, it sounds like, as expected, both were comprehensive in scope, the processes that the global conversation, engaging civil society, and of course the UN 75 declaration. But it sounds like, yeah, degrees of emphasis, and especially the focus on climate change that was very clear, unequivocal, and of course the pandemic when we all faced it together as a collective community since the early part of this year were prominent in both documents. But the actions going forward, we're going to turn to that in our next round of questions and look forward to your ideas, especially in connection, Natalie, with the Secretary General's report, which many of us are hoping to engage in and not just eagerly await. Now let's hear from one prominent voice within civil society, Giovanna Kuhl. Earlier this year, your campaign, Together First, collaborated with the UN 2020 initiative on the development of a UN 75 People's Declaration. And it fed insights and recommendations into the official UN 75 declaration that we've been hearing about. Which, if any, of the People's Declaration proposals do you feel are reflected in the final intergovernmental UN 75 declaration? And going forward, are there any particular ideas from this People's Declaration that should be taken into consideration by the Secretary General and his team as they prepare the follow-on report about implementing the commitments within the UN 75 declaration?
Thanks, Richard. My honor to be here. So, first of all, I need to say that we are very grateful to the co-facilitators from Sweden and Qatar and to friendly member states, especially the ones from Alliance for Multilateralism, who provided us the space for dialogue and inputs into the declaration. And that's the kind of partnerships we need to improve the UN. So I think our proposals from the People's Declaration that reflected clearly in the UN 75th Declaration were the request for a follow-up process to strengthen multilateralism, also the modalities for civil society participations and inclusion, and a better funded UN as one of the 12 commitments. And I want to talk about civil society inclusion and participation because I think it's one of our strongest proposals in the People's Declaration, and the UN 75th Declaration gives a space for this kind of idea to be developed as part of a follow-up process. So it's the proposal of a UN civil society champion, which is rapidly gaining support, and we'll be releasing a report tomorrow on it. Basically, we believe a civil society champion is needed because levels of engagement with civil society within the UN system are currently insufficient. And the civil society champion would make three positive contributions. First, it will increase the UN limited capacity to proactively engage with civil society. Second, it would allow for the improvement of processes for civil society engagement. And third, and most important, it would allow the UN to hear from a broader, more diverse and representative cross-section of civil society voices by proactively seeking out through field visits and consultations their views. Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanna. And as we go into the further part of this dialogue of engaging the Alliance for Multilateralism, I'm sure members of our audience are going to have questions for you about more details on the People's Declaration and what is necessary going forward to implement the UN 75 Declaration. Now, turning back to the Alliance for Multilateralism, the other co-lead initiator is, of course, the government of France. So we're eager to hear from Gervan Labras. Since the inception of the Alliance a year ago, the focus has been 6 specific initiatives in such areas as climate action, digital connectivity, and gender equality. How do you see the relationship between the declaration and the Alliance's work in these specific areas? But at the same time, we're eager to know, is the Alliance equally concerned with broader systemic change, looking at the system as a whole and not just specific piecemeal efforts within the topic of global governance? Gurvan.
Thank you, Richard. Good morning to you all. Very pleased to be here right now in Paris. Thank you. So first of all, Richard, to answer your question, as the second leg of this alliance, I'll start by thanking Christophe Heusgen for a perfect account on how and why our two ministers launched the alliance more than 1 year ago now, and on which premises. And this will allow me to focus more, like you suggest, on maybe the path forward and the way we can interact with, especially I would say the UN system as a whole, and the way we inside the as member of the alliance perceive the interaction with the global multilateral system. So first, I think we have three types of convergence between what the alliance is doing actually and what the UN 75 declaration is stating as principles. First is a convergence in method, the second a convergence in substance, and the third, of course, is the convergence in the objectives. The convergence of method is that, well, UN 75 declaration has been adopted and negotiated in a very open manner and in a very consensual manner. There hasn't been anyone distanciating from the process, and it's been very clearly stated all over the process that all the goals and the challenges that are mentioned need a collective response. That's exactly the way we think, and the alliance that these global challenges can be need to be tackled and will eventually be solved. So that's the first point. The first point is in method, multilateralism as a method, and of course, it is going to apply in the substance. Christophe Heusgen has already made a few points on the different ways and areas where the alliance actually is trying and engage into tackling issues that are mentioned very clearly and explicitly in the statement. I can, for each and every one of these initiative, by the way, the commitment and the participation of civil society is a prerequisite for the alliance. I mean, it's important. It's a very multi-stakeholder way of envisaging global solutions. We don't think that in most of today's challenges, whether it be global challenges like climate change or development or the multilateral health system, or more localized challenge, a sectoral one, or related to some strengths, to threats and security issues, for example. In each and every of these aspects, we need multi-stakeholder approach. And in the Paris call for cyber security, for example, we have right now more than 300 local authorities and civil society partnerships that are stated into that initiative. And the last, so I'm not going to elaborate more on these aspects because they are for everyone very easy to find at which point we try to create that synergy with the civil society organization. And I'll move to maybe the last point, which is the objectives that we share with the declaration. The idea is to show that there is not necessarily a consensus, but a critical mass of countries all over the world that still think and are ready to commit to the idea that we need to tackle the issue through multilateralism, and that we want that's the multilateralism as a method, but also that we want to develop our national policies and our cooperations and to increase our security and prosperity through a rule-based order and rules that are the same and previsible and consensual. So it goes to show that, and we need to show for that matter that multilateralism is still important. Of course it is still needed to address global issues, but also that it's still working. And I think that's important that in the course of of last year, the initiative, the alliance has showed that you can gather more and more support, that you can rely more and more countries under these ideas. I'll stop there with maybe two phrases. The first is the alliance there is a bit at a crossroads now. There are questions that we are not going to solve right now in that discussion, but it's open-ended. So it's for everyone to bring in ideas, and not only states, but also, of course, civil society organization, international organization, to bring its idea and to create the kind of coalition and critical mass that will bringing a new course of action. And it's helpful at any point because we have a number of rendezvous all over the year to make stock of all of these initiatives. But we're going to have questions eventually on where do we want to go? Are we going to make a club, or are we going to stay open-ended? Will there be conditions or criteria and so on? I don't answer those questions, but as a policy planner, since we have been in the first place, also one of those that help build the concept of alliance, we know that these questions are also to be discussed. And that's the last way maybe to answer your question on the link between the UN and the alliance, because eventually it's about defending that an universal global order that we are trying to think about.
Thank you very much, Gerfan. And I think, yeah, you outlined it well in substance and objectives. I think these core instruments we've been talking about, the UN 75 Declaration, the similarities with the People's Declaration, shared principles, rules-based international order, on the methods, which is really going to be a big part of our conversation today, how we can collaborate together. There's already been an example of collaboration with the Paris Call for Cybersecurity at last month's UN 75 Global Governance Forum. And we're very thankful to have our colleague Volker Lehmann tell us a bit about that. It was held immediately before the UN 75 World Leaders Commemoration on the 21st of last month. Specific global governance innovations and new partnerships were presented and discussed in connection with the forum's outcome document, a roadmap for the future we want. In the UN, we need a Vision 2020 for UN 75 and beyond. Many of you hopefully saw the second volume of this outcome document was released earlier this week. So Volker, as a representative of one of the forum's co-sponsoring organizations, can you please walk us through briefly the roadmap's innovation and partnership track recommendations and initiatives, give us a sampling, and how they relate to this UN 75 declaration follow-through process?
Yes, thank you very much, Richard, and good morning to all of you. Pleasure and a privilege to be here. From my organizational background, we like to pepper our introductions and our statements always with some quotes from a former social democratic chancellor, namely Willy Brandt, the doyen of international cooperation. But I think I want to go a different route here because I was reminded of the title, and I was reminded of the late German chancellor, also a social democrat, Helmut Schmidt, who used to say, if you have visions, you shouldn't go into politics, you should go see a doctor. So with that being, the grandmaster of realpolitik's quip and slogan for many, many years, I thought I should see my doctor and ask him. And my doctor told me, okay, so Vision 2020, what that actually means is you have normal vision. That's normal vision that is required to read the stock quotes in the newspaper or numbers in the telephone book. So that's pretty good. It's nothing special, but it's pretty good. Interestingly, I found he told me it's also the minimum of eyesight that you need to be a pilot fighter, to be a fighter pilot. So in that sense, I found this is probably a very fitting title for the roadmap from our conference that Richard told us recently, just that we hosted, a vision for 2020 for UN 75 and beyond. Because if you look at the document that we came up with, you might find, as I do, that it is a very clear-eyed document. It's steeped in analysis of the realpolitik and the situation our global governance system is in at the moment. So there is no romanticizing of the state we are in. And it acknowledges that you can either get with the system to a breakdown or you can get to a breakthrough. But at the same time, the farsightedness and the boldness and the ambition of our proposals in our report easily match up with that of a fighter pilot. And my apologies here for that rather combative metaphor, but those of you who are also vested in the infighting at the UN know where I'm coming from, probably. So with our Global Governance Forum, we scholars, practitioners, activists, philanthropists, business leaders, and policymakers, we wanted to promote a UN that better harnesses different ideas, different networks and capabilities of different governance, businesses, and civil society. And with this outcome document, we basically, as Richard already mentioned, had forward-looking proposals, both in terms of partnerships and also in terms of innovations when it comes to the institutions. I want to briefly touch on the partnerships here, because I think especially one might also be interesting in the context of the Alliance for Multilateralism. We had 20 partnerships all in all that came out of our forum. They were always multi-stakeholder partnerships among civil society, private sector, philanthropy, and governments, and the UN system. My colleague, Sarah Burke, she had one partnership that's jump-started a project on drivers of inequality, hidden wealth, and tax evasion, and how to avoid those as a groundwork for a fair economic system. And then another partnership project we launched was on lethal autonomous weapons systems. And this one might be particularly interesting in our context of the discussion today, because it also shows potential for the collaboration with the Alliance for Multilateralism. As most of you know, the Alliance itself made a declaration on guiding principles on such weapon systems. But we felt we want to give it more teeth and support the Alliance in this endeavor. And so we had representatives from the German government, from civil society, from academia, also from the business sector. And in our partnership, we tried to develop a set of positive obligations to safeguard meaningful human control on such weapon systems. And we hope that we will be able to bring those into bearing with member states in their negotiations for a legally binding additional protocol to the Conventional Weapons Convention in Geneva. So some very practical steps how we want to support the alliance's work. But secondly, from our conference and the roadmap, we also had a number of carefully researched and debated policy proposals, institutional policy proposals. And here again, we were realistic enough to abstain from proposals that probably have no political chance to be implemented in our lifetime. For instance, reforming the Security Council structure and the veto and stuff like that. We are all too familiar with, not likely to happen anytime soon. But instead, we came up with a number of proposals on how to, for instance, change the working methods to replace the current Peacebuilding Commission with a strengthening, to strengthen the Peacebuilding Commission, turn it into a Peacebuilding Council, and thereby also take off some of the pressure of the UN Security Council. So let me just sum up here. With this conference, with our forum and the roadmap, we want to really support the declaration that came out of the member states process. We want to up the ante, we want to help member states, and we're seeking for partners such as the Alliance for Multilateralism to go forward. And all that being said, despite the COVID crisis and the crisis of multilateralism we see ourselves in now, we can also see this as a chance to really turn it around, to make it a breakthrough, And by deepening the bonds of global solidarity and cooperation, we can really turn this corner into a territory that is much closer to the late Willy Brandt and not the Realpolitik Helmut Schmidt only. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Volker. The last month's Civil Society-led forum and the recommendations that you've given us a sampling of serves as a good segue to our next round of questions on how civil society and the Alliance for Multilateralism can collaborate more effectively on the UN 75 Declaration follow-through agenda. Back to Ambassador Heusgen then. Building on your earlier response, how can global civil society better partner with the Alliance? Specifically, how can civic groups be more helpful in advancing the Alliance's core multilateral cooperation principles? But at the same time, we're eager to hear from you. Are the Alliance's members prepared, for instance, to keep these same civil society groups informed about key, sometimes sensitive political positions and tensions? This information we feel would be very helpful to civil society-led campaigns to better navigate bottlenecks to strengthening the UN system.
Yes, thank you very much. The inclusion of civil society, or let's say more general, of all also non-governmental stakeholders in the Alliance for Multilateralism, but in the UN in general, from my perspective, is key. I think when you look at the state structures today, both on a national and international level, the role of civil society has become more and more important. And to resolve any of the major problems that we are facing today, to resolve these will only be possible if we include civil society. And there has to be a lot of rethinking. There has to be a lot of remodeling the way that we work. And let me just take the example of what Germany right now is involved in for 2 years. This is the Security Council, where we look at crises all over the world, from from African crisis to Afghanistan, to Haiti, everything. And what we have done during the last 2 years, when in particular when we had the presidency of the Security Council, to have briefers from civil society come to New York, or now virtually participate in the meetings of the Security Council and clearly express their views. And we had a record number of civil society briefers in both years. And one of the what was for us very important was then to also have more female briefers than male briefers, because this is one of the big issues: gender equality, participation of women in all UN processes, and when it comes to peace and security, not only to be heard, but to be involved in whenever you have negotiations for peace treaties, etc. But so civil society is important. Then also, when we look at the implementation of the SDGs, there is no way that central governments can do this alone. You need the regional governments, you need the local governments. And then you need civil society to promote it, to stand behind it. Governments alone cannot create all the enthusiasm, the political will to actually implement the sometimes very difficult goals. And also, you need companies, you need the business world. Without those, you will not be able to have the to reach what we have. We have at the UN a certain readiness to include civil society. At the same time, you feel resistance, and this goes a bit, unfortunately, according to geographics, also the type of government that the countries have, that we have in the Security Council or in the UN in general. But there is no alternative. concretely, with regard to the Alliance for Multilateralism, we have on certain issues already very concretely worked with Reporters Without Borders on the Partnership for Information and Democracy, or with the Wildlife Conservation Society on the link between animal health and human health. But as I said, also companies can contribute to vaccine initiatives, as well as to closing the digital divide and or fighting impunity. So for us, when we have meetings of the Alliance for Multilateralism, we also always include civil society speakers. But you know, there are coming back to what I said at the very beginning, governments, international organizations are designed as intergovernmental operations, and it's still, you need to push every day to include civil society. And as I said, there is not everybody is thinking like you know, France or Germany and other EU countries. And there are many countries that want to exclude civil society briefers, and there we have to fight very hard, you know, to be even more concrete here, because these are some of the battles that we have here. Our Russian friends are always trying to exclude civil society briefers. For our Chinese colleagues, it's even a reason to really go into I almost would say into battles with us when it comes to have civil society, have minorities. You know, this is legends what we had lived through here to get, for instance, a representative of the Uyghur minority even enter the UN premises. So it is, we have to work very hard on this, but for me, it's key. Without civil society, we will not resolve any of the problems that we are facing, at least not in a sustainable way. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador Huisken. As I turn to Giovanna and hear your specific ideas on the Alliance and specifically UN 2020, Together First, taking this UN 75 declaration agenda forward, let me make two quick points. We're really thankful to Germany, to the European Union. It definitely is acknowledged that they were among the leading champions of civil society in this process the last year in the development of the declaration. At the same time, it did not go unnoticed that civil society was not allowed in the formal negotiations that all happened online, of course, in the latter part of the process. So I'm sure that will come up during the Q&A and how we can avoid that in the future, because we really want to have a more active role in engagement, especially now in the follow-through process. Mainly because of poor time management on my part, I'm going to kindly ask each of the speakers to be as succinct as possible and very concrete with your suggestions so that we can get through the second round and then hear from our amazing global audience. Giovanna.
Thank you, Richard. And in the sake of time, I will take advantage and already including my answer, Adriana Zebdenu from Plataforma Cipó question about harnessing this momentum to make global governance more inclusive. And also Dan Sperrell from Baha'i's office question on how can like-minded member states and civil society better collaborate to demonstrate a unified front. So first, I think we must recognize that partnerships are required for meaningful change. And I think we are in the same page on this here. At the same time, they are also a challenge for the form of global governance we have today and the UN structure, as the ambassador was saying. And this doesn't correspond to the diversity of actors of the 21st century. Fortunately, member states recognized that the UN needs to be more inclusive and engage with all relevant stakeholders in the declaration. And also, I think interesting to know that the Secretary General has emphasized in recent speech that we need partnerships to deliver an effective multilateralism, one that is inclusive and networked to meet the challenges of the 21st century. So I think the Alliance for Multilateralism has been a key partner when it comes to civil society inclusion, as already mentioned by the ambassador and Gurvan here. And if we can work together for the establishment of a UN civil society champion, we'll be creating a platform for further collaboration and a model of what a multi-stakeholder successful partnership for the UN we need looks like. And also already answering to Arthur's those questions on how we can include those most often left behind. I guess that a UN civil society champion would help on that, because as today, let's be frank, who has the access to the UN is like the civil society who is in New York or mostly Western-based organizations. So we do need someone within the UN system to reach out to less heard voices. Thank you.
Thank you, Giovanna, and great to see your questions coming in. We welcome plenty because we're going to get to as many as possible in a few minutes' time. Volker, building on Giovanna's response, could you also add any insights you have about this critical Secretary General follow-through process, how these civil society umbrella groups working with like-minded governments could take it forward? And does there need to even be talk now of a follow-on intergovernmental process to take on some more ambitious goals, the unfinished business from UN 75?
Well, this is quite a bit again. I try to be faster than the first time. I mean, when I look at what we've been doing, I mean, I've been involved with all of you in different settings, of course, in the run-up to the 75th anniversary. I feel that what we've been trying to do was that on the one hand, we want to help UN member states to abide by their commitments of the UN 75 declaration, but at the same time, we want them we want to push them a little further, because that's, I think, also the role of civil society. Despite all, the partnership talk, I think there are, there's division of labor while working together. When I look at the declaration, for instance, it says the member states promise to promote peace and prevent conflicts, and quote, international arms control, non-proliferation and disarmament agreements and their architectures need to be upheld, unquote. I think this is very important, certainly in the times we are in, but at the same time, I would say that our proposals from our different networks also made the point that we have maybe new treaties and new international agreements to help with disarmament. And you're all aware that there are these initiatives of like-minded member states that have been quite successful, for instance, when it comes to a treaty on banning landmines and more recently on nuclear weapons ban. And I fully acknowledge that not everyone within the Alliance for Multilateralism is a big fan of banning nuclear weapons at this point. But this is, again, coming back to our partnership project, the need for working on curbing lethal autonomous weapons. We felt this is a probable field of confluence where different proposals, for instance, also by Together First, if I may make this reference here, to help member states come together in these new settings to work on innovative treaties that haven't really been fully developed. And maybe also to go back to what Mr. Lebras said in the beginning, how we see the alliance here is as a partner, hopefully to exchange ideas and develop new ones on agendas that are still in the way of being formed. So I think there is the whole, this is the alliance on the one hand, us civil society on the other, trying to live up to the declaration and pushing the declaration's commitments even a little bit further. Thank you.
Thank you. And in addition to our colleague, Mr. Watt's summary at the end today, we're going to be summarizing the concrete recommendations, especially in this segment of the discussion. And for that, we'd like to hear from Mr. Lebras, one or two concrete ideas for your Alliance for Multilateralism, and maybe build on some of the points you've just heard, both from Ambassador Huisgen and Giovanna and Volker.
Okay. Yes, Richard, thank you very much. I'll try to be very brief for the sake of time. First, on the importance of not only associating civil society, but also, in fact, nourishing our own agenda through the initiatives that the civil society organizations are actually carrying. I think that's pretty much, and that's absolutely the philosophy of the Paris Peace Forum that is going to start in a few weeks now, on the 11th of November. That's exactly what we intend to do while creating that forum where you bring in a number of project leaders and in a place where they can interact with decision makers from countries and international organizations. And it's very important to bear in mind that we don't not only need for the sake of simply procedure to have civil society on board, and we don't just need to have them on board because we think they are allies in a very complicated world and in the face of reluctances on multilateral processes at large. It's just that we need them because all of the agendas that we need to process in any aspect need to build consensus that go far beyond the consensus of the states. So that's the way we need to work on that, and to be a bit more, maybe a bit more practical to communication. Communication is a very important point in the alliance, and I must say that that's exactly and first and foremost the German side of the alliance that really thought this up. So I pay tribute to that, but it's very important to have strong communication on our goals and principles and initiatives, and to the fact that we are always open to start new processes in the framework of the alliance. And maybe the last point I would make would be to say, and that's going to be the more practical of all, we need to, a good alliance, a good initiative in the framework of the alliance is an initiative where you gather businesses, security, civil society organizations, states from all over the world, and international organizations. From the moment a platform, just like Volker suggested, a platform that would be able to gather all that kind of actors, it would be more than half of the job to be able to bring in something new in the alliance and put it forward and multiply the impact and the surface of the alliance.
Thank you very much, Gervane. Discussed prior to today's program, and many of you are familiar and participated, the Paris Peace Forum is coming up, the next edition, November. It will be virtual, of course, this year. And that's yet another really important government of France supported effort, but very much civil society driven platform for engaging on these issues, and will be critical, I think, to the follow-up. Now, Natalie, you have the toughest job as our cleanup batter. We'd love for you to build upon what you heard in this round of the questions, and in particular, and we know it's early days and some of it might be a close hold, but what can you share publicly in terms of your thoughts on external partners, civil society working with the Alliance to engage and support the Secretary General's mandated follow-on report, something we're all very excited to assist in some way?
There's not that much I can say. I can say there will be a follow-up process. So, you heard it here. It is being led by the Secretary General, himself, his team. He's personally invested in it. I do think that makes a difference. My office was part of the Secretariat. This is directly under the Secretary General's control. I understand it will be an inclusive process. It will engage civil society, youth, other stakeholders. It will build on what emerged from our consultation. And just a very, I know you want some concrete suggestions. I'm a UN official. I'm not really, you're going to be pushing a particular, holding a candle for a particular proposal. I will mention what came up in our consultation. But the idea of consultation, the idea of dialogue, the idea of this ongoing engagement, not just from headquarters, but actually through our local offices on the ground. That's really important. And I hope that is a legacy of our initiative. And we will be at the Paris Peace Forum. We will be presenting our results there. And I think, I really hope that we can inspire some concrete actions from that. But I know, despite everything I've said about it being inclusive, the leadership has to come from states. I mean, civil society can support, can raise ambition, can hold to account the roles that Volker mentioned. The Secretary General is aware of this, and I know he's focusing on member states as part of the follow-up process as well. sure the PGA, the President of the General Assembly, will be playing a role too. But I think one thing I want to say, it's very interesting when you listen to the speeches of the Secretary General, when you look at the solutions I mentioned before that have come from civil society, there's a huge range of creativity there. And then it's not pie in the sky. We have concrete, feasible proposals like the one Giovanna mentioned on the civil society champion that came out very strongly in our consultation, and also some more horizon opening ones on governance of the global commons. There's lots of concrete actions that the ambassador, has mentioned as well. But during the debates, the negotiation on the declaration last month, the statements made by member states, on the anniversary during the opening of the GA, I mean, a lot of the positions were the traditional reform topics that came up. So I think what could be, interesting, and I speak very much in a personal capacity here for the Alliance for Multilateralism, you have the ability to cut across these dynamics. If you're cutting across the traditional groups, then you also have a chance to not just talk about the traditional positions. You have a chance to espouse a little bit more, creativity in that. And of course, the leadership role, concrete steps. How can we move towards the positions that are expressed in the declaration? But I think I like this idea of multilateralism as a method because, partnerships is very much a buzzword, and partnerships can achieve something. They can achieve a great deal. We've seen the Gavi Alliance, the Global Fund. I'm sure we'll see a lot more of that. Partnerships between civil society, it wasn't just arms control. I was very proud when I was in civil society to be part of the 1 for 7 billion campaign that led to changes in the sectional selection process. You can achieve something, but ultimately you need that universality and that legitimacy that the UN brings. So it's that interplay between the alliance, between civil society, and bringing that back to the UN level that I think will be challenging and really interesting to see, but it's key because that's the way we're going to move towards having this upgraded UN, but as part of a global system that is a real partnership. As we've heard, I think all speakers say, we know we need to work together across society. So it's how do we manage that enduring need for the universal platform with these coalitions, with these alliances that can get stuff done.
Thank you so much, Natalie. At this chance, we get to engage this incredible global audience participating in today's program. I'd like to call onto the screen, though, our colleague Fergus Watt, the International Coordinator for UN 2020. We want to have him jump in and respond to any of the questions you're about to hear. We do have a whole bunch, as I hoped, on the Q&A function. We continue to welcome more. We really want you to also mention where you're coming from, maybe your organization, if you wish to include that as well. What we're going to do out of respect for time, we'll take the first two on screen as we had promised earlier, but then I'm going to consolidate the rest under these two headings of the advancing the UN 75 and specifically the commitments of the declaration, and then the key critical issue of going forward, better collaboration between civil society and the Alliance for Multilateralism. We do want to begin by hearing from our colleague from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, Dr. Adriana Abdennour from the Plataforma CIPO. Adriana. And when we do the questions, I will be asking individual panelists if you can field just one. If you hear two questions that you like and you have a brief answer, you're welcome to respond to two. Adriana, please.
Hi, hello from Brazil. Thank you very much for the excellent panel. I think within this broader theme of engagement by civil society, but also the need to render multilateralism closer to the field, I was thinking about the role of region organizations, and it's great to know about the EU's involvement, but I was wondering if there can be more engagement with other region organizations. Here in Latin America and the Caribbean, of course, we're going through a crisis of regionalism as well. The channels do exist, but they're being underutilized. And it occurred to me, for instance, to give one example, that the relationship between the EU and Mercosur, the trade agreement notwithstanding, could serve as a platform for this type of engagement, but also serve as a strategic space in which civil society and the private sector, which already engage with Mercosur, could then be brought into the process more broadly with a follow-up of UN 75. So just would love to hear your take on region organizations as part of this process. Thank you. Obrigada.
Great. Let's take that question. Yeah, let's see if one of our colleagues, especially from the Alliance for Multilateralism, how have you been looking at the issue of regional organizations in connection with the Alliance, but in context of today's discussion, the UN system working better with regional organizations, including in Latin America, taking this agenda forward. Ambassador Husgen, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share?
No, absolutely. I would not limit it to the Alliance for Multilateralism, where, of course, the EU or other regional organizations, for that matter, could be easily invited if they haven't been so far. But it's clear. We have here, again, sorry that I talk about Security Council, but regularly we have briefers from the African Union, briefers from the European Union, and they are involved in many of the not only peacekeeping operations, but also in they are partnering the UN in so many activities worldwide, and not only with regard to peace and security. Mercosur so far, seen from New York, I've not seen very active as an organization here. I may be mistaken, but I must say regional organizations like ASEAN or ECOWAS or so, they are active, and they deal with ASEAN dealing with the issues of the Rohingya in Myanmar, and so I think regional organizations are key. And if some of the issues are better dealt with by regional organizations, I think the UN doesn't even need to step in. So this cooperation is very important. The EU has a full-fledged office here, an ambassador who takes place in so many meetings and on some issues represents the European Union, and where the member states are not even speaking sometimes. So absolutely, role of regional organizations in the alliance, in other words, key.
Wonderful. What I'd like to do is group the two major subjects that we're covering today, advancing the UN 75 Declaration commitments. We have several questions that have come in this regard. I'll briefly try to summarize them, and then we'll hear from our panelists. Again, choosing one or at most two of the questions that you'd like to take, and then we'll finish things out by the questions related to the second major theme of the collaboration between civil society and the Alliance. On the declaration commitments, the 12 commitments going forward, Dan Perel, one of our partner organizations, the Baha'i International Community, writes, how can like-minded member states and civil society better collaborate to demonstrate a unified front and bring more on board the need to strengthen multilateralism? So even concrete principles of multilateralism, and his follow-on question is recognizing that trust is at the heart. Trust is at the heart of every relationship that binds society. How can the relationship between civil society and member states help build trust? That seems to be at the heart of many people, what they feel is the breakdown, the crisis in multilateralism today. Another question from Alexander Gorelick is, should we not temper expectations of what the world body, the United Nations, can realistically achieve amid elements of the new global disorder? For instance, are we making the agenda too broad and ambitious? All these multiple crises at once that we're seeing today: climate change, the pandemic, continued threat of even nuclear war, let alone international terrorism. Another question that came in prior to today's event by one of our colleagues, Martin McIntyre, is why can't we have a way for individual global citizens to vote on global issues separate from their national citizenship? He puts forward an idea he calls one human society, sort of a global referendum that allows citizens to engage. And this actually in many ways speaks to different elements of the UN 75 Declaration. There's a whole commitment on partnerships, engagement of youth. I think there could even be an element with the digital cooperation component of the UN 75 Declaration, because it seems to imply that we would use technology to allow citizens to engage. So as far as, innovative ideas out there to flesh out, to elaborate the commitments made in the declaration, I'd love to hear from colleagues, panelists about your specific ideas. And here, I'd like to turn to our colleague Fergus Watt, who has joined us, specifically maybe speaking to some of the elements that Giovanna referred to in the UN 75 People's Declaration, talk of a second People's Chamber, new ideas for civil society to engage the UN system. And what are your personal thoughts on this last question about a referendum mechanism of the UN system for direct citizen engagement? Fergus.
Well, thank you, Richard, and much appreciation for the forum that's been organized. It's been a great discussion so far. Just on the narrow question of citizen engagement and participation, I think that I think in our discussion this morning, partnership generally has been a cross-cutting theme, and I think that's a good thing. Partnerships between civil society, business, international organizations, and governments at the UN to reinvigorate multilateralism, and partnerships functionally and pragmatically between civil society and the Alliance for Multilateralism. I'm delighted to hear the comments from Ambassador Huskin and Gervan Labras about the importance that the Alliance attaches to these partnerships going forward. Within the UN 2020 campaign, I think that we've found as a campaign, and for example, our People's Declaration has been endorsed by over 400 civil society organizations from a range of thematic perspectives and different parts of the world. When we put out a call for support from former world leaders, presidents, prime ministers, and so forth, 49 former presidents and prime ministers came forward to endorse the call for a dedicated international process for reinvigorating multilateralism. So I think this speaks to what Natalie Samaras-Singh has highlighted in her reporting on the UN 75 office's work, which is that we are at a moment when there is broad public support for the kind of changes and innovation that we know is going to be necessary. Now, in terms of some specific ways that individuals, we the peoples, can be brought more integrally into the work of the UN. I think there's a spectrum. There's a range of options. Some of them are more realistic, such as the one that Giovanna highlighted on a civil society champion that would bring about more uniformity and reliability to civil society's engagement at the UN. But there are also other initiatives. The European Citizens Initiative is a concrete example that perhaps provides a model for something called a World Citizens Initiative that would allow citizens to bring ideas to the UN, and that's something that our campaign has highlighted. So to Mr. McIntyre's question, I would say that there's a range of different ways that citizen voices can be more involved at the UN. It will take work and persistence and collaboration, partnerships. There's that word once again to make it a reality if we're going to move to a next generation United Nations.
Great, and in connection with the other questions raised, I want our panelists to continue thinking, and any volunteers, I will welcome them to respond. But at this time, I'd like to ask our colleague, Dr. Maria Joao Rodriguez, to please kindly come onto screen and introduce yourself. Maybe mention the UN 75 event your organization collaborated on with our partner, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, last month, and then please share your question, please.
Thank you very much, Richard, and my greetings for everybody. I'm the president of European Political Foundation located in Brussels, and I was part of the Global Governance Forum, yes, and then we organized a particular conference before the General Assembly. Look, addressing the two questions identified by Richard, which are central ones. On how to advance the 75 agenda, it seems to me that the question we need to ask is what should be our main political leverage? And I believe this is the unfolding COVID crisis, but there's a kind of wake-up call for us to move to another kind of development, which should be driven by SDGs. This is a big moment for us to showcase why we need to implement SDGs agenda. But then, of course, we have a big problem is that we don't have the means. And the key issue of the reform of the United Nations system and multilateral system is to make sure that we do have the means to implement the SDGs agenda. And this is about aligning financial institutions, World Bank, IMF, development banks to support the agenda strongly, WTO also. This is about taxation. And this is about, of course, governance, where civil society needs to be much stronger in the influence. Which brings me to the second question raised by Richard. How can we make sure that civil society is better involved in the big initiatives launched by United Nations system? Look, let me make my reference to my experience as European politician. My conclusion is that civil society can strengthen its role when it is playing not only a particular role in designing policies, but also in implementing the policies. So the partnerships, from my viewpoint, should be about designing solutions, but also implementing the solutions on the ground. And this means that civil society should be supported and financed directly. This is our experience in the European Union, and this might work. So these are my comments so far. Thank you very much, and my greetings. Let's go on working together.
Obrigada. Thank you so much, Maria Joao.
Obrigada.
And you know, I wanted to see if Natalie or Giovanna want to come in on the second part of the question, especially with Natalie's extensive work with leading NGOs, civil society movements in past years before joining the UN in the last 2 years. And, but especially speaking to, she said, policy implementation, the SDGs, that work is well known, but in the design phase and articulating policies, what are some specific ways in this follow-through agenda, building on Ms. Joao's point? And we also had a question that I want to build on for Gurfan from the Alliance for Multilateralism, which speaks to Ms. Joao's first part of her question. And that is from Ms. Farnaz Rezai asking, faced with the continuous unprecedented challenges posed by the second and now even third waves of COVID-19 pandemic, what are future plans for the Alliance to support the UN, the WHO, the World Health Organization, and other international organizations in the current humanitarian response and the wider recovery efforts? We know that the Alliance had an important statement issued in April about the pandemic. Wondering if, Gurfan, you could just say a few brief words about that initiative, as well as responding to Ms. Dr. Rodriguez's comments. Please, Gurfan.
Sure, thank you. I had seen the question in the application, and that's a very good one, and it offers me the opportunity to mention the fact that we are going to actually hold the meeting of the Alliance in the forum, the Paris Peace Forum, which is going to be focused on health issues at large, but also specifically on the issue of fostering the One Health agenda. And it includes launching and promoting the creation of a council for global health, which is an idea that we've been pushing forward inside the framework of the alliance since the summer, since last May, and that's going to be leading in that meeting to very concrete steps forwards. So this is going to be an important achievement, I think. And of course, beyond that, the agenda of health and the multilateral architecture for global health is going to remain a very important one for the islands, I suppose. But I would be happy to hear also Christophe Heusgen on this, of course.
And Natalie and/or Giovanna on the first part of the question I raised, please.
Okay, I will go first. So on the issue about to make civil society more involved, to make sure, I think it's very hard to find channels if you are not based in New York, or let's say in the US, or maybe in the UK. And again, and I know I'm being repetitive, but that's why I think it's important to have a UN civil society champion within the Secretariat. And in terms of policy implementation and ways to follow through the agenda, I think one of the best examples we have is the 147 billion campaign. And I think Natalie, since she was at the civil society and leading that campaign at that point, she can tell us more about that.
Okay, I'll say a few words about that. I've got a few other things I wanted to say as well. But I think the lessons I draw from 147 billion is sometimes, you can come up with all these fancy designs for how to make things better. But I think ultimately change comes about through people and through good leadership. And that, applies to the top of the UN and applies to all levels. So, I think the idea of focusing on leadership, on senior appointments, on quality leadership by member states, I think that's an important area. The second lesson I drew for that, which might be important here, is, sometimes people can surprise you and states can surprise you too. You can find areas of alignment that cut across the traditional positions if things are presented in certain ways. So, the reform process for the Secretary General selection is something very crucial to the permanent members of the Security Council. But at a time when the Council is, really being criticized, as it was then, as it is even more now, for not being able to change, to evolve, and that's not only the behest of the permanent members. There's disagreement more broadly in the membership about what the best reform models are, especially when it comes to expansion. But this was an opportunity for them to signal, actually, we can play ball, we can engage with the wider membership. And I think it was interesting also from a General Assembly perspective that this was seen as a crucial issue for General Assembly revitalization. And I think probably the biggest lesson we learned we went through states' positions and we saw that actually more than 2/3 had at some point indicated support for the various proposals we put out, but no one had put it together and no one had kind of lit the spark. And the final lesson, which I think is very relevant to this exercise, is you need to have to be able to restore confidence that some change is possible to lead to further change. So some of the less ambitious kind of ideas maybe that are coming out of the UN 75 consultation, some of the low-hanging fruit, some of the changes that I'm sure, Ambassador and others, we all feel could happen, should happen, there's agreement, they're not quite happening. I think it's sometimes worth going for that, even if they may seem not to respond to the enormity of the challenges we face, because they signal that this is an organization, as we know, because it constantly evolves, that can change and that can learn. So I think that's very important. But I think the other comment I wanted to make, just building on some of the earlier questions, is that we do have a challenge now. We have this sort of declaration, this common agenda set out by member states, to a lesser extent what came out of our consultation. We have the COVID recovery plans, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. How are we really looking across these frameworks to bring them together into something that not just people can understand, but states, especially states that are smaller and have fewer means, can actually act on? There's so many goals, so many things. So I think it's a real challenge now to bring those together, to find those enablers. I feel like that's what the Secretary General wants to achieve. What are the things that will have some traction across the board? How can we crystallize that from all these documents we have and turn that into this sort of action plan. And just a quick point on the resources. I mean, there's a lot flowing around now in COVID recovery. Unfortunately, a lot of that is not actually reaching developing countries or emerging economies. The Secretary General made that point, I think, several times in recent speeches. Nor is it necessarily purposed at achieving that greener, more inclusive, more equitable future that clearly people don't just want, but actually see as essential right now. So I think, that's the challenge as well. It's how do we make that financing work? Can we get that political agreement, all partners really saying, this is what we want. We are prepared to make the compromises that, world leaders were prepared to make 75 years ago. And we need to rekindle that kind of same spirit, I think, of the vision and the pragmatism to say, this is in our interests now. I'll leave it at that, but happy to come back on anything more specific, Richard, as well.
Thank you, Natalie. Very helpful insights. I'm going to ask my colleague Volker Lehmann to take a look at the many amazing questions that have come in and the Q&A function. We're coming up on time, but I want you to pick one or at most two to give a brief response to in about a minute or two. But first, I want to turn to Ambassador Huisgen. Of course, you're welcome to respond to anything you've heard during this conversation portion of our program. But there were two topical questions that came up that I think you're best suited to respond to, just on the broader theme of how do we get civil society writ large, not just the specialists working on these issues, to care and to engage the UN system, to work with the Alliance for Multilateralism. Look no further than the debate last night in the United States, the presidential debate. And our colleague, Dr. Tad Daly from Los Angeles Citizens for Global Solutions, asked a question about why there wasn't a word in this debate, and I think the first presidential debate, about broader global governance themes, but really the question of the United Nations. Nobody even knows really, I think, that the 75th anniversary is being commemorated this year in the United States, and our political leaders are not going out of their way to make it an important issue, that we need to believe in these institutions that a country like the United States helped to found back in 1945. But from your own continent, the EU, a final question from Professor Joris Larik of Leiden University. And he writes, oh, I think I just lost the question. I had it here for a second. 1 second. He writes, how can the Alliance and the EU promote civil society inclusion in the wider world, so outside of the EU, when we're seeing a crackdown on civil society within the EU? And he specifically notes the pressures for academics and the media in the illegal restrictions placed on them in countries such as Hungary, which is recently known to force out the Central European University in Budapest. And then in Poland, he gives the example of the Sidorsky trial. So if you could kindly share any concluding thoughts for our audience today, as well as responding to those questions, we would be very thankful.
And all that in 1 minute, right?
And take as much time as you need.
No. I also have to leave. No, these are all very, very relevant questions. I also watched the debate last night, and there was a bit of foreign policy, but very few ideas. There was one, you remember that there was one discussion about the Paris Climate Accord. Paris Climate Accord is UN. So the UN was basis, and one of the candidates clearly said that he wants to return to the Climate Accord. And I think that was already a message towards the UN. I think what is clear in all our operations here, we are the greatest in adopting resolutions in the Security Council, in the General Assembly, in all the committees. What we have to make sure is that what we do is actually then seen on the ground, and is something that people see how important it is. It's no surprise that organizations like UNICEF or World Food Program or the climate office in Bonn, these are issues, these are organizations, sub-organizations that are known. So we have to deliver, we have to get out of ivory tower here in New York, where you negotiate resolutions year after year and nobody really pays attention outside the UN. So on climate, for instance, we have the Green Climate Fund, but I then several times talk to ambassadors from very small countries and say, well, can't you help us here and there? And then I get, well, we do regional programs, but we have to be specific. We have to see that the ordinary citizen realizes, yes, there is this value added. About Europe, I mean, this is not the body here, but of course it is a nightmare that you see that the values on which the European Union was founded after the experience that we all went through, that now you gave some specifics that these foundations are questions, and we have to do everything to fight back. And if it happens in Europe, you can imagine also how it happens worldwide. I told you before how much we are trying to get civil society into the Security Council, and we have discussions there. But it's key. Like no, I don't have the time for this. But we have to deliver. We have to go to the people. We have to be much more locally involved. We have all these wonderful conferences like the one we have here. I think we have to go into local cities, talk to the people, have town halls so that the ordinary citizen knows why it's key to support the United Nations and other other international organizations. So we have to deliver. We have to be clear in what we say. I wanted to respond to one of the questions where it said, well, don't we have to temper expectations? Isn't too broad? No. If the UN does not tackle climate change, the pandemic, nuclear proliferation, nobody else will do it. So we have to tackle those, but we have to deliver. So thank you very much for including me here. And this is very important, and we have to come and we have to be very, very concrete in our actions. Thanks.
Greatly appreciated, Ambassador Husgen. Volker, have you come up with a question?
No, but I came up with an answer that actually Ambassador Husgen gave instead of me. So that's all good about, are we too ambitious with the agenda? I would agree with Ambassador Husgen. We're absolutely not too ambitious. We have to be as ambitious as we are, because there is no other global organization. Ultimately, everything inevitably ends up in the lab of the UN, and it has to end up there. The question is, and that was mentioned already, what are the resources? What are the resources to tackle those questions? And with resources, I mean both the finances, and Maria Joao mentioned where the finances already are, could be Natalie as well about COVID recovery funds. So the finances, those resources are there. What is probably even less there, or is even less mobilized, is the political momentum. That's another resource that we have to have if we want to use the UN at the maximum of what it can do, because without resources in terms of money and political momentum, political capital, you don't get anything done in this broad agenda of the UN. And I think this is also a stark reminder that we shouldn't wait too much for the US. It was mentioned, the debate. Nobody talks about the US. Forget about the problem with multilateralism will not be over after the election, even we have the best possible outcome that I don't dare to mention here. But because of exactly that, it is so important that we are having this meeting, for instance, today with the Alliance for Multilateralism, a much broader set of actors, of member states. And I think it is those countries that really, together with us, have to move the multilateral agenda forward, the momentum, mobilizing both resources and political will, because we shouldn't expect that this is just happening from any given big country and thereby resolving the problems of the multilateral system and the big challenges we're having on its own. That's not going to happen. So it has to be a much broader, more level playing field of member states and us, civil society actors.
Wonderful points to end on. I'm so sorry that we won't be able to take more questions. Of course, this conversation will continue, and we'll welcome your participation in future forums of this nature. Before I turn it over to our colleague Fergus Watt to share his own reflections, let me mention to Ambassador Husgen and anybody else, Ambassador Husgen shared that he was in 3 other UN Day related events before this. I bet he has another one at the top of the hour. So we completely understand if you have to go leave the screen at this time, so to speak. But we thank you once again for your wonderful, enriching remarks and ideas shared in today's forum. And I want our colleague Fergus Watt to take as much time as you need, because what you have to share is extremely important and is really at the heart of why we organized today's session. Fergus.
Thank you, Richard. Well, I mentioned previously that the idea of partnerships and the political moment that we're in are really sort of common threads through the conversation that we've had today. I do want to reinforce the message that the global consultations led by the Secretary General have brought to us, that there is broad-based support through global publics for improving international cooperation, so that while we do have challenges posed by authoritarian and nationalist governments in many countries, including some of the more powerful countries, we must remind ourselves that there's a bedrock of support for the UN, for international cooperation, for global solidarity, and a widespread recognition of the importance of improving the modalities of international cooperation if we're going to solve and resolve some issues like climate change and health pandemics, etc. So I'll just, as multilateralists, a lot of hard work lies ahead. I think that given the UN 75 declaration and the mandate that has been given to the Secretary General to come up with recommendations to advance our common agenda and to respond to current and future challenges, I think this puts us in a bit of a stock-taking moment. I think that for the next perhaps months, there will be some additional creative discussion and thought to just how we actually go about our work for a renewed UN system, whether as civil society campaigners or on behalf of governments and the Alliance for Multilateralism. I think we need to broaden our tent. We need, as Giovanna has reminded us, we need to find ways to bring global civil society more integrally into the work of United Nations fora. And we need to work together to bring about the kind of transformations that we know are necessary. Just as a partner in the UN 2020 campaign, we really value this partnership with the Alliance for Multilateralism. And we look forward to working together more closely in future. And as a consequence, we're also grateful to you and Christina, Richard, and your team for organizing this meeting today.
Thank you, Fergus. Your excellent summing up leaves me with just one more duty: to express our appreciation and thanks to our superb panelists today. Thank you for your very thoughtful contributions and for your time during a busy time like last month. More UN activities await, hopefully for many of you, the next 24 hours. I'd also like to thank our incredible organizing team and all of the co-sponsors, the Alliance for Multilateralism, of course, but also UN 2020, Together First, the Friedrich Ebert Stifter New York office, the Baha'i International Community, and my colleagues at the Stimson Center. So finally, a special thanks to all of you, our global audience today. As we noted earlier, we'll send around a short summary of today's conversation in the coming days. This will include specific recommendations that flowed from the conversation, many of the contributions that you have made. We're thankful for your commitment and continued engagement on these issues post UN 75, and we look forward to opportunities to collaborate together in the important year ahead. Thanks again, everybody. Happy UN Day.
Thank you. Happy
Thank
UN Day.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Richard and the team.